Hi, in this session, I will take you through the foundations of deploying and configuring virtual machines in Windows Azure. Um, what I will do is to go through configuring a web farm using availability sets, load balancing, and virtual machine extensions to deploy a web application. Then I will configure diagnostics and monitoring for the virtual machine, as well as use network security groups to lower any potential attack surface area to this particular virtual machine. So what I'm trying to build is a multi-tier web application and deploy it in an Azure virtual network. So building a multi-tier application is a common pattern in realizing business workflows in the cloud. Typically, entities in the web front-end tier in a multi-tier application, such as the web front-end servers, are placed in a separate tier than the SQL database or maybe the backend application tiers. So functionality which is used in the application servers and backend instances need a higher level of security, and hence they are isolated from the front-end tier. And these the data tiers typically only receive traffic from the front-end tier. So what I'm trying to build is an environment which is a multi-tier application which is secure from that, but from that fashion. So let's try and build this particular architecture where you have a virtual network with two subnets, and then you have an availability set where I'm putting those virtual machines, and I will install a web application as well as SQL database using what we call as PowerShell desired state configuration, and I will go through that in a minute. So let's just first go to the portal, and let me just make this a little bigger. So this is my portal. So you can actually go to the primary Azure portal using portal.azure.com. So if you just type portal.azure.com, that takes you to this particular portal. So in the first exercise, I'm going to create a virtual network that will be used for deploying the multi-tier application. So if you look at the diagram, the first thing I'm going to build is this dotted diagram here, which is a virtual network. So then I will create a virtual machine and specify the virtual network configuration, and then put the virtual machine in that virtual network. So the first thing I'm going to do is from this Azure Management portal, I'm going to create a new virtual network. So I'm already logged in to the portal. So I'm going to click New here, and I'm going to click Networking, and I'm going to create a virtual network. So I'm going to choose the deployment model as Resource Manager because that's a new that's a new model, and if you click on any information panel here, it tells you more about what the resource manager is. So I'm going to go ahead and click create and say I want to create a virtual network. In this case, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it Ops Training VNet, and I'm going to give it an address space. In this case, I'm going to give 10.0.0/24. So this block of address is, so what I'm using is what we call as a CIDR block. And when I create a CIDR block, it essentially gives me a bunch of addresses, IP addresses, which we can address, which I can leverage. So I'm going to give the CIDR block of 16, which gives me about 65,000 IP addresses. So now I need to create a subnet. So I'm going to create this subnet. So subnet is essentially a segment within my virtual network. So within a VNet, I can have multiple segments of, I can segment a VNet into multiple subnets. And in this case, I'm going to give an address range with a CIDR block of 24, which gives me 256 IP addresses. And I'm going to give this is the subscription which I'm going to leverage, and I'm going to give my resource group a name. And so essentially, resource group is a way for me to organize all my resources together. So I'm going to pin this to my dashboard and click create. So at this point, it's going ahead and creating that virtual network. And because I pinned it to my dashboard, I can see the fact that it is creating and it's actually in the process of deploying that virtual network. And as soon as it's done creating that virtual network, it opens that up for me. So this is my overview. When I click into my blade, I can see the overview of my VNet. And then within my VNet, what I really want to do is I want to create a multiple subnets. So as you can see, as part of me creating the virtual network, I already specified that I want to create one subnet, and it already created that for me. That's the app subnet. So if I go back to my picture here, it already created that app subnet and it created my virtual network. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create a data subnet where I want to put my databases or my SQL Server databases. So I'm going to click new subnet and I'm going to call it data. And I'm going to give it a range of 10.0.1.0/24, which gives me about 256 set of IP addresses. And then I'm going to leave everything as default and I'm going to click OK. So as you can see, in a second, it will add that subnet. So I got two subnets here. I got a virtual network with apps subnet and a data subnet. Each of the subnets have provides me available addresses of about 251. So now I want to create a virtual machine and put that virtual machine into the apps subnet. So I'm going to click on new compute and I'm going to choose Windows Server 2016 data center and I'm going to choose the deployment model as resource manager and I'm going to go ahead and create. So at this point, it asked me for a bunch of information for my virtual machine, and I'm going to provide a name. In this case, I'm going to call it WebVM-1, and the disk type which I'm going to store is going to be an SSD because I get the best speed. It's when I say SSD, it's a solid state drive which provides low latency performance. I also have the option of choosing HDD, but in this case I'm going to keep it in an SSD drive to give me better performance. And I'm going to give a name, username, which I'm going to use to log in to my virtual machine, and I'm going to also give a password which I'm going to use to log in to my virtual machine. And I'm going to create a new resource group to put my virtual machines in, and I'm going to call it ops vnet vm rmrg. It's a separate resource group than the other resource group which I created. So Azure Resource Group is essentially a container that holds all the related resources for an Azure solution. And in this case, I want to keep all my compute separate from my virtual network. So I created a separate resource group so that I can keep all my compute separately. It's up to me on how I want to group my resources together within a resource group. And I'm going to choose East US as the location where this virtual machine is going to be hosted. And there's one other option which you see, which is very interesting, is you have the ability to bring your own license. So let's say you have a Windows Server license in your on premises, and if you want to bring it in, you can leverage that. So by default, when I create a virtual machine, the operating system cost is included in the VM I create. But if you have a license which you own already, you can bring that license, and therefore you are only paying for the compute and not paying for your Windows Server license. And this is a unique option which Azure provides. In this case, I'm going to click no and I'm going to say OK. So now it's going to ask me for a bunch of other information over here with respect to what type of virtual machine I want to create. So based on what some of the information I provided, it gives me a recommendation on what type of machine I should put in here. And in fact, DSV1/V2 may be a good one. So, but if I click view all, it gives me a lot more other options here. There's several options of virtual machines you can create, but in this case I'm going to choose a DS1 V2 standard, and I'm going to click select because that's the that gives me the right amount of cores and the IOPS and all which I require. And the next step is it asks me whether I am interested in putting this in a managed disk. So what this means is when I create and create this VM, I have the option to have to store. Essentially, I need to put that in a disk, but I have the option to have Azure manage the disk or me manage that disk, right? So if I put this in a managed disk, a lot of the resilience and everything is automatically taken care, but I also have the ability to create my own storage account and put my disks in here. So if I say yes, you see that the storage account is option is gone. If I click no, I have the option to create a storage account. So in this case I'm going to keep this no, and then I'm going to create a storage account where I'm going to put this virtual machine in. And I have a unique name which it already created, which I'm happy with, and my performance is premium, and this is a locally redundant storage, and I'm good with that. I'm going to click OK here. So it created a storage for me to put that virtual machine in, and then it associated that to this particular configuration. The next thing I'm going to do is I have this diagnostic storage account, which is also interesting because I want to, this provides me the ability to create a storage account that will hold the diagnostic logs for my virtual machine that can be then used for troubleshooting purposes later. So I'm okay with this particular name for the storage account. So I'm going to keep that separate, and I'm going to put that as well in this I'm going to set that particular storage account as well. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to put this virtual machine in a virtual network, and I want to put it in the virtual network which I already created. So if I go back to my diagram here, I'm creating this particular machine, and I want to put that into this virtual network into the apps subnet. So let's go back here, and then let me choose the VNet, which I already created, which is the ops training VNet. That's the one which I created. And I really want to put that in the subnet called apps. So automatically it chose the apps subnet because that was the first subnet in here. So it automatically chose that subnet. So I have the ability to choose the data subnet if I want to, but I really want to keep that in the apps subnet because it's the web application. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to open up this web application so that external users can access the web application which I'm going to be hosting in this virtual machine using port 80. So I need to open up an inbound rule so that people can access via port 80. So what this is what I'm creating is a network security group. So a network security group is essentially like a firewall which contains a list of security rules that allow or deny network traffic to resources connected to Azure virtual networks. And NSGs can be associated to a subnet, it can be associated to an individual VM or individual network interfaces or NICs attached to a VM. So when an NSG is associated to a subnet, the rules apply to all the resources connected to the subnet. And the traffic can further be restricted by also associating an NSG to a VM or a NIC. But in this case, I'm going to associate to the virtual machine. And what I'm trying to do is I'm going to allow port 80. So that's a good enough description of NSG. So let's go ahead and create it. So I'm going to call this apps NSG. I need to give a priority for this particular rule to execute. I'm going to give the priority of 100. I'm going to say source as any. And the service which I'm going to choose is HTTP because that's the traffic which I want to allow. I'm going to say HTTP. And by default, when I say HTTP, everything is grayed out because I'm just talking about port 80 here. And I'm going to choose allow, and I'm going to click OK. So at this point, I created an inbound rule which allows port 80 to access, and I say OK. Now, just one more thing, one last thing I wanted to do is to create an availability set. So I have this thing called high availability, and I'm going to choose availability set here. So what's an availability set? So in Azure, virtual machines can be placed into a logical grouping called an availability set. So when you create VMs within an availability set, the Azure platform distributes the placement of those VMs across the underlying infrastructure. So should there be a planned maintenance event to the Azure platform or an underlying hardware or infrastructure fault, the use of availability set essentially ensures that at least one VM remains running. So I'm going to click create new here, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it web AV set here. Sorry, I just wanted to that's not the name I wanted to give. I wanted to give it, let me copy my name here, and I want to give it web AV set, and I'm going to give it I have to specify a fault domain. I'm going to keep it 3 fault domains and 5 update domains, and that sounds like an okay configuration for me, and I'm going to click OK here. So at this point I provided all the information I need for my virtual machine. I'm going to click OK. So if I scroll down here, I also enabled diagnostics, so it can actually log all my diagnostic information to the diagnostic storage account. So I got everything I need as of right now, and I'm going to click OK here. So at this point, the validation is succeeded, and it's deploying the virtual machine. So what I've done so far is I created a virtual network, and then I created 2 subnets underneath it. I created a network security group to allow port 80, and then I created a virtual machine, which is actually in that hosted within that apps subnet. So this is going to take a minute or so, maybe a couple of minutes to create. So at this point, I'm just going to pause this recording and I'll come back. So it took about 5 minutes, and it created my virtual machine, and I'm done. As you can see, it created it. And if I go back to my portal, I can see that my web VM is running. So if I go back to my resources, as you can see, I got my virtual network, and within the virtual network, I got 2 subnets, and then within the in the subnet, I've got the virtual machine deployed in there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy the rest of the web application. The web server as well as SQL Server using PowerShell. So I opened up the PowerShell console here. So I got the PowerShell IAAS console pane right here. So you can download this PowerShell console from the Azure website, PowerShell application, and then you have it running. And then the first thing I want to do is I want to log in to my Azure account. So I'm going to run this command, which is login Azure RM account. I'm going to right click on that, and I'm just going to just run that particular selection so that this particular window is logged in, or this particular session is logged into my Azure account. So I'm going to log in. So since it's a Microsoft account, it takes me to my let me put my password here. Okay, so I signed in, and there you go. It's just so right now I'm signed in, and I got the subscription, right? So I got it shows me the default subscription here. But if I want to get let's say if I have multiple subscriptions, and if I want to see all my subscriptions, I run get Azure RM subscription command. So let me just run that. So I got 2 subscriptions, and this is the subscription which I'm really interested in. So I'm going to copy this subscription, and then put that into my notepad here. So this is my subscription ID. So subscription ID here. So this is a subscription ID which I'm interested in. That's great. So I'm going to run a command which essentially selects that particular subscription. So I'm going to say select Azure RM subscription, and I'm going to give it that particular subscription ID. So let's say if I put the subscription ID in quotes and I run this command, it's going to select that subscription ID. So whatever commands I'm going to be running in there is going to be run under that particular subscription. So the next thing is I want to create a variable name to assign, basically it's assigned to the name of the resource group, the first virtual machine which is created. So which I need to use it. I have to use it later. So I'm going to put in a resource group name equal to ops VM. This was the I'm just all I'm doing is assigning a variable to that to my virtual machine. And I want to get my storage account associated to that resource group. So there you go. I'm going to run this. And it's basically giving me all the storage accounts associated to that particular resource group. So if you remember, I created two storage account, one for my disk and one for my diagnosis. So I really want the disk. I want the storage account which is going to be where the disk is stored because I really want to use it in my later script. So I'm going to copy that here. So this is the name of the storage account which I needed later. So I'm going to copy the name of the storage account. So that is the storage account name. And then the other thing I'm also interested is the region, because I would need that as well. So if I look at the primary location, it says East US. I need that particular string, which I'm going to use that in my script later as well. So my script is region. That region is going to be US. At this point, I'm going to open up open up a script which I already have in my in my drive. So this is the script which I'm going to run. So that's not what I want. So I have to put in my script, I have to put a DNS name, a storage account name, and a location, which is what I created. And the DNS name is what is where the web application is going to run. And so I want to find out which DNS may be available, because I don't want to put some DNS which is already taken, and I don't want to want that to fail. So I'm going to call it. Let's see if this particular domain name is available, and I'm going to just right click on it and run just that selection, and says, hey, that's true. So I have this particular DNS name available. So I'm going to copy that DNS name, and I'm going to put that in that DNS name column. And then I also want the storage account, which is the storage account which I earlier created, and I need that which is going in as an input to my script. And I also need my location, which is also an input to the script. So this is all the information I need to be able to create what I'm trying to do. So let me go through this particular script and let me explain what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create the second virtual machine. So if you go back to the diagram here, I created one virtual machine. I want to create this machine and this SQL Server machine, and I'm going to use. So in this case, I'm creating a script or per PowerShell script to create these two machines, so that it can be automated. So if I go back to the script, I obviously have a bunch of variables which I'm defining, the resource group name, the VNet name, and the type of server names and all those things. Those are all the variables. So first I'm going to get the existing storage. I get the existing availability set. I get the existing virtual network, get a reference to that. And then I create a public IP address because this is going to be hosted in a web application which is hosted, which need to be available externally. I need to create a NIC, and then I need to create a subnet, right? I need to create a subnet as well, and then I need to create the virtual machine, and then I would go ahead and create my SQL server. So this is where I'm creating my virtual machine for my SQL server. Again, the same thing. I create a TNIC and then a subnet, and I'm going to put that in my. I'll be putting this in my data subnet, right? So I got two subnets. The first one I'm going to be putting in the app subnet, and this one I'm going to put this in the data subnet. So as you can see, I put subnets of 1.id, so that's the data subnets ID. And then I would create the data disk where I'm going to store the disks, my storage, and then I'm going to create an image, and I'm going to essentially create that virtual machine. So all it's trying to do is creating the virtual machine and SQL server, and I'm going to put that in the app subnets and the data subnet respectively. So let me go ahead and run this, and then when it runs, it's going to ask you for credentials, and I'm going to use this credential for my virtual machine. So just put a credential which you can remember later. So at this point, it's running. Let me. So as you can see, the code is running. I had actually made a slight mistake earlier where I put a different name for my NSG, and I corrected that. So the script is running right now. It's going to take about 5 minutes to run this script, so I'm going to stop the recording and come back later. All right, so at this point, the PowerShell has already executed, and all the uh, I've deployed both the web server as well as the SQL server. So here it's creating the virtual machine, and I created the SQL server as well. So both of them are deployed at this point, and it's all working. So that's great. So the next thing I want to do is to use virtual machine extensions to deploy the web application into the web server. So I'm going to use what we call as PowerShell desired state configuration to be able to do it. So first, let me go into the resource group and then open up the web VM. Actually the VM resource group, and then the web VM1 machine. So as you can see, it created the web VM1 and web VM2. So those two virtual machines are created, and SQL VM1 is the SQL server. So at this point, I'm going to open up the web VM1 virtual machine, and I'm going to choose extensions. So, so what's an extension? So, extensions are basically software components that extend the VM functionality, and it simplifies various VM management operations. For example, let's say if the VM access extension can be used to reset a VM's password, for instance, or you can create a custom script extension to execute a script to whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to create, so I'm going to click add, and there's a bunch of different types of extensions I can add. It could be Puppet, it could be automation, it could be, runbooks, which I can run. So I'm going to choose, in this case, use PowerShell desired state configuration and click create, and that's the extension I'm going to be leveraging. And now I'm going to choose a zip file which has got uh, my files which I want to leverage. So this is basically the the config file. I included the zip file, and then I want to create a module called qualified name of the configuration, and I'm going to this is the module uh, whi- which is going to be run, and the data collect and then from an arguments perspective, I'm not going to provide anything. So I got this as the latest, and I'm going to enable the data collection, and the version is going to be 2.0. So I'm going to auto upgrade the minor version if it's required, and then I'm just going to click OK. So at this point, it's going to submit that deployment. And the same thing, I'm going to repeat that with a web a VM2 as well. So let me go back to again. So if I go to the resource groups here, and then go to the VM resource groups, I want to do the same thing with web VM2. So I open up web VM2, click on extensions, and I click add, and I'm going to choose PowerShell desired state configuration. I click create, and I'm going to choose the same config file here, so which is the web config file, and it's going to be the same module uh, uh, module qualified name of the configuration, and I got enable. So and then I'm going to put version as 2.0, and I'm going to say auto upgrade minor version, so that every time a new version is deployed, it automatically upgrades the version. So there it is. I created that as well. And the next thing I want to do is, again, I want to install the SQL Server component. So again, I'm going to go back to my resource groups. I'm going to go to my resources, and I'm going to pick up my SQL Server VM, and I'm going to click on extensions, add an extension, and I'm going to choose my PowerShell desired state configuration. I click create, and at this point, I'm going to create a new file, a separate configuration file, which is just for the SQL configuration. And I'm going to provide a name, a module qualified name for my configuration, which is how it's defined. And then I'm going to give it a version number, and I'm going to say yes, I'm going to upgrade the minor version automatically, and I click OK. So at this point, I'm basically installing both the pretty much what the application itself. And let's go back to the logs itself and see whether they have been deployed. So I go to my resource groups, and then let me go to my VM resource group, open up web VM1, and let's connect to that machine and see what's been installed. So I'm going to open this machine, and then I'm going to put my password. There it is. I'm going to log in. So over here, when I log in, I should be able to see all the diagnostics logs which it created. So I'm going to go to essentially so far what I did was I installed the web application in here. So I'm going to go to my plugins folder and look at my PowerShell command, and looks like the desired state configuration did execute. So I see some log files here, and this looks like the configuration. So far it looks like it all went through fine. It completed. So we can assume that everything has gone well. So let's validate the web application itself. So let me go back to my portal. Well, go back to my portal from my other machine. Let me just close this machine here. So at this point, as you can see, the application is still being deployed. So it's going to take maybe about 5 minutes to deploy all this web application and as well as the SQL Server components. Let's give it some time and then let's take it to the next step. So at this point, as you can see, both my web application as well as the SQL Server components have been installed. So if I go to my resource group here, and if I go to my resources here, so this is where it's installed. I got my SQL Server where data is running, and I got my virtual machine. So if I go to my virtual machine itself, and I take my IP address here, and let's try to browse to that IP and see if my web application is running. So that is my IP address, and I'm going to, so as you can see, my web application is up and running. This is running on web VM1. And then the same thing if I go back to the web VM2. So I should be able to see that as well if everything goes well. So let me go to my overview and take that URL here. So one thing I haven't done is I haven't load balanced those two URLs, which would be the next step where I would use my Azure load balancer to load balance these two URLs and then use the same IP. So as you can see, it's connecting to a SQL Server database and this web application is up and running. That concludes this demo. Thank you so much.